So we've just started a new Avalonia app. We've already got it to the point where we have a side menu and buttons. Next up, what we want to do is improve this visual a little bit. So if we take a look at the mock-up, you can see we have icons on the left that we want to add, as well as some animation properties. So we want kind of the fade effects to be a bit nicer and animate in and out. There's a few ways we can do this. So let's take a look at the best ways to achieve it. Let's first focus on the buttons, and to start with, how we get multiple elements inside of a button. So right now we just have content and it's a string. So you might be thinking, how are we going to insert an image or an icon in front of the string? Well, the benefits of Avalonia that came from WPF is that we can get rid of the content, and now inside here is where the content would be. So if we type stuff, you can see the content still appears on the right side. This can be changed to anything, so you could have a label inside of here with content of home. And obviously you can't do double because you can have one item similar to the window or user controls. But instead, what you could do is do a stack panel, which is your single top level element. Move your label inside. And now we could do, say, two elements. And now you can see one button has two labels inside. You can then change this orientation to horizontal. Now we have two items. So then the next step is fairly easy. We could even just paste this image in here, for example, and reduce the width to, say, 22. And there's a little icon to the left of the button. Update this to whatever SVG we want, and we have icons on the left of the buttons. Now there's a little easier, well, not necessarily easier, but a cleaner way to do this, and that's with font sets that are icons. For batch process, what I've done is chosen this phosphor icon set I really like. So you can see you can scale them up. There's regular, there's thin, there's fill, and there's also duotone if you want to do nice icons. For now, I'm just going to use the fill. So what we want to do is download the fonts first. So you can get the fonts from GitHub or from the download all button. And then if we just go into assets, we want to make a new folder. I'm going to call this one fonts. We will open up that folder. So open in Explorer. And then we go into here. I'm going to paste in the phosphor fonts from that download, both the regular, which is the outlines, and the fill, so we can choose which one we like. And I've also included the Acco Pro font. This is a font I quite like, and it's used for many things I have. So we're going to use that font as well for the actual text. Fonts can be tricky, and it takes a while to figure this out. But again, now we have them in here. You can see we've got them all there inside the folder. And if we just right click and go properties, we need to change the build action to an Avalonia resource again, so that they can be accessed inside of resources. Let's start with just the home text, where we want to change it to Acco font. And as with any resource, we first need to go to the app file, and this is where the app resources are. And we want to include those fonts. For that, we can just do a font family. And the key of what we want to call it. So in this case, we'll call it Acco Pro. We'll start with the regular one. And then inside of here, we can do the path. So that will be /assets, fonts, and Acco Pro-regular. So Acco Pro-regular.ttf. Now, this won't always work, because one thing you have to do, and it takes a while to figure this out, is if we double click on, say, a font in Windows, we can now see here where it says font name, Acco Pro. This has got to match exactly. And if we take a look at the Pro bold, you can see it still just says Acco Pro. So this is where a lot of people get confused with fonts. The font name is one thing, as in the physical file name, but the actual font name that appears in Windows list is the other name. We need to declare both. So for that, after the actual full path, we need to put a hashtag and then type out exactly as was seen in that font name, just like that. If you don't do that, it won't work, or it'll work until you add another font and then things go wrong and you get all kinds of weird things going on in the UI. If we repeat that now for Pro Bold, you can see we'll change regular to bold, but we'll keep the Acco Pro name the same, because in the bold, you can see it's exactly the same. With that, before we then apply it to default styles, let's just jump in and try to set, say, this specific label to a font family, dynamic resource, Acco Pro Bold. Then we'll have to compile because the resources haven't been built yet. And there we go. We can now see we have the Acco Pro Bold. Looks like possibly a bug with the default offset there on the baseline of fonts. So we'll fix that with padding for now. But I don't want the Acco Pro bold anyway, I just want Acco Pro. So you can see it's very similar to the stock font being used, but I do just prefer this specific one. So instead of applying it here, we want this as a universal font being pretty much used throughout. Now we could apply, say, a font to images and buttons and stack panels and labels, but the smart way to do it is to assign the font to the top level window, and this will cascade down to every element. So if we just chuck it on the window for now, just to see, do a dynamic resource Acco Pro, and then this should update. There we go. So you can now see all of the fonts have gone to Acco Pro. But instead of applying it there, we don't really want to apply it in the window directly. We'll go to the default styles, and then here we'll just do the same thing. But as you know, we'll use a selector of window, then a setter with a property of font family. So we're doing exactly what we've just done, just in a style. And this allows us to just reflow the entire app's visual through styles and not through embedded windows and having to go into the XAML files. We can just edit a style or reapply a style and completely change the appearance of the app. We can see there after building, it shows up now correctly. And the next thing we've got to do is fix this offset. So if we just zoom right in so we can see, this font offset is now quite a bit wrong. And I'm pretty sure that's a bug. That should pick up the baseline font level in the font. But I think with custom fonts, there's a bug. So for now, temporarily, let's just go to the button and we'll apply, as you can see in here as well. Oh, that's as far as I can zoom in on there. So in the styles, let's just leave the style for now. Ah, there we go, just because I was typing. So in the style here, we can now see we want to set a padding. And we'll do 0, 250. So you've got left, top, right. So right's fine, it's just top and bottom. And because we're overriding the default now, we need to make it larger. So we actually want probably 10 all around with a bit more at the top maybe, or a bit less at the bottom. This is just really visually, and there we go. That value looks pretty much centered now. So this is specific to our Acco Pro font due to a bug. So we could comment this, could do presumed bug in font baseline, fixing with padding. And then we can report this to Avalonia if they don't see this video and see if it really is a bug. And then that could be removed once we're done. That now gives us, if we rebuild, this should go to centerline. There we go. And the icon is not currently centered, but we're obviously not going to use that icon for the real fonts. The process for the phosphor fonts now is very similar. So if we double click, you can see this has got a different name here in the visual, so you can't use that to figure out the name. You need to open it up in Windows and read the name here. So font family phosphor, and for the fill, it's phosphor-fill. So it's the same as the file names. So let's start with just importing those in the app XAML. Copy and paste phosphor, I believe it was. Yep, phosphor.tvf. And phosphor there, and then phosphor-fill. And then the key of fill. That should now be those two fonts added. We can go back to here now, delete that image. And inside of here, what we want to do is copy and paste the same label. And we could do a class of icon. So we're treating it similar to CSS. And then in this content, we now need to figure out what we do to put in a Unicode value. Because icon fonts use Unicodes. They don't use like letters, they'll use a specific code that's not normally on the keyboard. So let's just search for, say, home. And you can see there's the house that I used. I think that one there. Go to fill, make it large. You can see that's what I've used. If we click this, we have the SVG you can download, which is good. You've got a PNG, and you've got the Unicode that's baked into this actual font file we've got. So if we see the Unicode there is U+, which just stands for the Unicode, E2C2. So that's the thing we want, E2C2. If we go back to the icon, let's just chuck the font family on first directly, just for quickness. We'll use Phosphor Fill. And now what we want for the content, in order to enter a Unicode value, you can't just type E2C2. So if you do E2C2, you just get the actual text. But because the Phosphor font doesn't even have the E's, that's what you're going to see. So the way you enter Unicodes is to put and hashtag X and then the Unicode and then finish with a semicolon. So it's very confusing, but effectively if you cut off that bit, that turns into what would be U+ on the other visual. And then you must end with a semicolon. If you don't, you'll get a compile time error, which you see down here. So make sure to end it with a semicolon, and then you can replace these values here after the X with actual Unicode. You can see there's an alignment issue again between the two fonts because the fonts are different. So we'll fix that with this class of icon. We'll take the font family out and we're going to do that in a style. And now we need a label selector for an icon that changes the font and the padding slightly. If we go to styles, we'll do a style. And then in fact, we also want to add it here so we can just see it happening as we're doing it. So what we'll do is we will take this exact stack here, go to the styles, and then where we've got the button, we'll paste in this exact button we're looking at. So now we can see as we're doing styles exactly what's going to happen. We'll do a selector of dot icon. We don't really care what it's applied to. So it can be applied to buttons, labels, anything else. We'll then do a property of font family and a value of Phosphor Fill. And let's see if that works. And no, because we don't have a target type, we can't just do a blank selector like this. So we'll specifically do labels for now. I guess we could do dot control, to give it more freedom. Anything that's then got a font family on. But let's just make it specific to a label for now, I guess. You could change the font from Phosphor Fill to Phosphor and just see the outline. And then one last thing we want to do on that is to set the padding again. I mean, you could do probably margin instead of messing with padding. Could you do 0 - 500 to bring it up? Yes, you could. So you could just mess with margin like that. So for now, we'll just copy and paste this code. And we could then make this into a user control, but that's quite a bit more work. So for now, let's just stick to adding these items here. So we just repaste that 5 times, and then we can go back up and re-update all these. And then we now just need to update these Unicodes to match whatever icons we want. And there we have those. I think the icon wants a little bit of padding as well. I think it's a little bit, see, it looks fine there actually zoomed in, but on here, when you zoom out, I guess, it looks a little bit close, just a tiny bit. So I think what we'll do is get the style for the icon, and then the margin on the right, we'll probably put 5 maybe. Let's have a look at what that looks like. Yeah, there we go, I prefer that. That looks nice now. For the settings one, we want to do the same thing, but just have an icon. So we'll copy that. We want to say grid.row of 1. And we don't need the stack panel in this case. We're just going to have the icon on its own. We don't need the horizontal stretch. So there we have the icon, and now change that to a cog. And there's the settings button. We can see when the settings cog is on its own, the spacing is now wrong. So you can see how when it's placed on its own, it's not centered. So that would be probably an issue with using margin instead of padding. And through a whole bunch of playing around, you can see now we have this style here. So what we have at the top is regular default font with the button. And what I've done is temporarily removed all the padding so we can see what a button would look like in normal font, not without a bug in the font's height, and with all the padding removed so you can see it hits the edge. The next button we've got with the Acco font. So what I've done for that is simply added the class Acco for now. Due to it having this bug with the font, I don't really want to apply it globally for now. So I've commented out the global font set here, and we'll set it explicitly with a class called .acco, so we can now apply specific fixes to labels with the Acco font. You can see this now makes the Acco font perfectly the same in terms of border around the button. Then I've done various styles, so one with an icon, one without the icon, one stretched, one normal, and an icon only. When we have an icon and text, I've applied an extra margin of 5 on the right side, so we get this nice spacing between them. And if we want to use an icon on its own, if we didn't have that icon on its own, we'd end up with this extra padding of 5 all the time. So we can then define a button with a class of icon only to remove that padding or remove that margin. This gives us all combinations now of buttons that we can have the perfect spacing for. Once I'm happy with that, I can now delete my 2 custom paddings and background colors for easy visuals, put it back to a default, and now we have a standard button, a button with the Acco font, a button stretched, an icon, and a single button, all now with perfect padding around them. All these styles are only required due to the bug in the font baseline. As soon as that's fixed, we can clean up all these styles and they'll be much simpler. But for now, we just simply have padding set here, padding set here, padding and margin set here. So we're just fixing for padding and margins. It's nothing crazy, but that's the workaround. Let's just go and update this now to match. So we must have the Acco class on the text, which we've now done. And we just need this now to be icon only. And there we go. We now have the buttons all nice. And we've got this settings button. The last thing down here, the icon only. In the mockup, I've made it transparent. So let's just do that now. We will add, say, icon only and transparent. In fact, the transparent side should be on the button because it's the button that's transparent. So let's do transparent on the button and then a style in here for a button with the class transparent. In here we'll have the property of background and the value of transparent. We can see then in our little test line up here, let's just add another one with a class of transparent. That now gives us a transparent button, but on hover we still have the effect. And I think what we'll do is when we hover, we'll grow the icon slightly. So we don't want a hover color on a transparent button either. For that, we can copy this part. So effectively the on hover, just do a comma to add multiple. Add the transparent back into the selector. So now both for transparent and transparent on hover, we have that background removed. Let's just check this works in the actual application when it's run. And it doesn't like us mixing 2 different types. So this is a content presenter when we select on this, whereas this is a button. So we're going to have to split this out into 2 styles. You can't really mix a style of 2 types. And this one will remove the content presenter. This one we will remove the button. That should fix that hopefully. And there we go. We now have, oh, that's not worked on that. Is this an order of precedence issue because we did the style after? Probably is. Yeah, so there we go. So it matters which order you put the styles in. If I put this style after, it's going to override this style because it then also selects every button. So we'll put the transparent styling after this one. And there's the buttons. So I think the last thing to do is some animation. For that, I think we just want to grow the text slightly and fade in the background color. So let's do the scale first. And what we want to do when we are scaling is we want to adjust a render transform. So whenever you're doing an animation, you want to make sure there's a default value first. And in this case, we need to make sure there's a render transform as a default scale of 1. So when it comes to animate, it's got a starting position to animate from. We will want that on the content presenter of the button because that's what we're going to be styling and scaling. So we have here the content presenter, but only on pointer over, because when we hover over, we're going to animate the scale up. So let's first make another style before this that isn't the pointer over. So it's just the normal content presenter. And then what we'll do here is for the property, we'll set the render transform, and the value we can define, as scale of 1. So that's a uniform transform. It's effectively the default value, but that makes it so it's now set. And then when we hover over, all we need to do is transform this scale, and we'll do about 1.1, just a slight growth. This should now, as you see, grow when we hover over. And then that gives us the hover effect. But if you notice, if we zoom in, see how I've put a big corner radius so you can see this? As you hover, the corner radius is getting scaled as well, and it gets clipped off. If we take a look on the GitHub for Avalonia, this is the button template, so we can see exactly what we're dealing with and what we're doing. And if we search for content presenter, you can see here the template is set with a content presenter, and the content presenter has the corner radius on. So what we're doing is when we're scaling this, we're also scaling the corner radius. Instead, what we're going to have to do is select into the button for the elements inside the content we want to scale. So for now, we'll scale the labels because that's all that's inside here. So instead of doing this scale on the content presenter, we'll just ignore that and do a scale on labels inside of buttons. For the hover over, we're going to have to cut that scale out, copy and paste this, and do a button : pointer over. And when you hover over the label, set the scale to 1.1. And now when we hover, you can see the labels are scaling, but they're not really scaling how we want. And to be honest, I'm not sure I actually like scaling the buttons with the text on. I think we really want just the hover on the text ones. And the single icons you can see here do actually scale and look nice when they grow. So for simplicity for one, we don't have to fix this and figure out a nicer way. We'll do this just on the transparent buttons. So when we have a transparent button and we hover over, that's when we'll grow. And the others we'll just leave for now as colored buttons. And then I think we now need some animation on these. So you see how they just snap? The color and the scale just snap to size. We just want to animate them. For that, we just need to set transitions. In terms of the scale, we can set the transition here where we set the base property. So we should have transitions, and inside transitions, we'll just literally put a new transitions array. And inside of that, we want to do, in terms of scale, it's going to be a transforms operation transition. The property wants to be the render transform. Don't know why we don't have IntelliSense there. And we should have a duration, which we do in seconds. So we'll do, well, as a time value, 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 0.1 seconds. Well, let's just do 1 second for now. And you can see how that takes a second to grow. So it looks obviously way too choppy. Let's maybe scale to 2. We now know it's animating though, so we'll do it to 0.1 seconds. And there's the nice little grow. So that's what you get on the single icon. Now we want to do the same for the background color. So we'll copy this transitions. We want this on any button really. So we'll do it in the content presenter, which we don't have a class for. So let's actually simplify this. Because we don't really care about just scaling the label anymore, we can scale the whole content. Let's just change this to the buttons template again. Let's just scale the whole template. That allows us to put all of the transforms and animations in here in one go. And then on the scale, we're just going to scale the content presenter again on transparent. So that should give us the same animation at the minute, but now what we're doing is working on the content presenter for both. And let's just set inside transitions, brush transitions for the background color. I don't know why we're not getting IntelliSense on the properties though. Maybe we just need to compile. And the duration, the same again, 0, 0. And let's just do 1 to check we can actually see the duration first. And there you go. You can see after a second, it fades in and out really slowly. So we know the animation's working. We also have the foreground, remember, from white to light white, so we want to animate that as well. Still not got IntelliSense though. Change that now to 0.1, that to 0.1. And what this just says is any content presenter on the button, if any of these properties inside the transitions, so foreground, background, or render transform are ever changed, don't instantly change them over this duration. So this is kind of a one-time setter saying what elements or what properties do we want to animate when they transition. This is setting just the default property of render transform, because sometimes if you remove that, it doesn't work. You can see here, let's just build to confirm it still works. You can see it still works on here. But when I did Avalonia a year or two ago, you had to have this default scale, so maybe that's not needed anymore. So all we've got to do is set up the transitions here to enable animation. If we remove that, all the animations go. Actually, if we build, and you go back to this harsh change. You put in the transitions, and you get this nice smooth animation. So putting all that together now, let's just take a look at how it looks. Here is the mockup, and here is the real application. You can see that's pretty accurate now. And on hover, you get this nice effect, which matches this kind of visual. I'd say if anything, there's a bit more padding and maybe the font's a little bit bigger. But again, this was just a visual representation. We can tweak it as we like. And the settings button grows. And one thing I noticed is we actually used the normal font there. So for transparent, let's just set the font family. You can't on that actually. Let's just copy and paste that. On the transparent label of .icon, we'll set the font family there to dynamic resource of phosphor, not phosphor fill. Does that now automatically detect and pick up? Maybe we've got a build. Nope, so I haven't quite caught that icon. Icon only. The label is icon only. So where did I do that? So we got label icon dash only, not icon. There we go. So that now automatically picks up on that styling. And there we have it. We've got a nice side menu, and this is basically ready to go. This is a working operation. So these buttons now can be bound to actions to do things. And you can see the default button actually has a scale operation, which will be similar to that render transform, that on click or on press, it actually scales it backwards. So I think those buttons look nice and feel nice now. So does this one. And that has the same click effect. So that's another one done. In this one, we've done custom fonts, fixing a bug that we've now discovered, I presume a bug anyway, in the baseline, as well as having these nice animations now on the buttons. Next up, I think we need to do some boilerplate work that allows us to now click these buttons and load pages. For that, we're going to have to do some view models first to see how view models work, make all of the page navigation, which is going to be very simple, but there's going to be a lot of kind of coding next with no visuals. That's it for this one, guys. I'll catch you in the next.